to do today.
Hello, where'd you come from? Me, my name's Tony, and I work in this museum in the Channel, southeastern Tasmania, in a little town called Margate. All the artefacts in this museum all belong to the families that grew up in this area between Bruny Island and mainland Tasmania. Today we're going to talk about this item. It's got a massive blade and it's razor sharp, and there's no bevel. You know what a bevel is on a blade? There's no bevel on this blade. And when you look at the back of it, we've got a square nut with a very rough thread by all standards, which means it was blacksmith made. So that helps us in dating the thing, but we'll talk about that later. What do you think it could possibly be used for? I'll give you 5 seconds to come up with an answer, and then we'll continue. Right, what it is a tobacco cutter. Now tobacco back in the 1700s, and I'm guessing it's back that far, because of the fact that it's blacksmith made and it's been hammered out, and you can tell it's been hammered out by the markings along the back here. The blacksmith would heat it up, hammer it flat to force the metal out, heat it again, hammer flat again until he got himself a razor sharp edge, and then he would temper it by cooling it very quickly in oil. Now the oils they used back in the 1700s was whale oil, they had a flax oil, linseed oil. Those sort of things were used to quench it, to cool it down so that it stayed really tensile and really strong and kept its edge. The nut, how did the blacksmith make the nuts? When the blacksmith put that bit of metal into his forge, he had different colours. He'd watch it. By the time it got red to yellow, it was the softest plasticine. He could drive a punch through it and make a hole in the middle. He could then use a tool which he'd have like a file with gaps in it to work his way through on a taper to cut a thread. By the time the nut cooled down, he could screw his threading tool in and out, and job done. So that bit of metal there with the thread belongs to this piece here, which is the hinge on our cutting tool. Another thing that makes me think it was the blacksmith is that after the 1800s, with steam in factories, these things would have been stamped out in their hundreds. They would have had a bevel on them, and you just sharpened the bevel. If you have a look in your kitchen knife, you'll see a bevel on it. The handles, the ferrule, when you look at it very closely, looks to me as if it might be the same age as the cutter. So they've still got the original handle. There's no other, the handle hasn't been made for any other purpose. And on the back edge here is a brass bush that's been part of the handle. Again, with the blacksmith, he's brought it through and he's hammered out over that to stop the handle coming off. The tobacco itself was made in blocks by the growers. And those blocks could be as big as half a house brick size, and half as high. So he would sell those to the shopkeeper in £1 or half-pound lots, half-pound weights, and not pound notes. And the shopkeeper would use this to shave the edges off the block, because he sold the block in ounce lots. Now an ounce of tobacco is not a lot of tobacco. But he would also cut it in what was called plugs, about that wide. So he'd push it through, cut it off, and then he would turn it on its side and cut 2 or 3 plugs off on the side, and he could sell those plugs. Now, tobacco in those days was used for smoking in pipes or for chewing off the end of a plug. It was only later in the 1800s that they got tobaccos rolled in cigars from Cuba, and then shortly after that they found that they could use rice paper to make cigarettes. So the habit of chewing tobacco became less popular, and the plug tobacco as such, by the time the Second World War arrived around, was no longer in use. You can still acquire it, but it has to be rubbed up to be used in a pipe. By the late 1800s, 1880s, the plug tobacco was rubbed, sold in 2-ounce packets and called ready rubbed. So you get it straight away and roll it into a cigarette, take it straight out and into your pipe. You've got your pipes in this kitchen. I must have prohibited smoking. Okay, well I'll show you how they did this with the tobacco. I've brought some with me. But, they did try to grow tobacco in Margate here once, but it was a foul tasting product and very unsavoury for smoking, so it wasn't a commercial viability. So these spinach leaves will have to do the job, and I reckon there was times when they tried to smoke that. But what they would do, the manufacturers, they would cut the stem out of the leaf, and then the leaves would be packed together without the stems. They would be packed together and then pressed under weight with steam. Now, some manufacturers would spice it up with, if it was going on the French market, vanilla. The French love vanilla. But nutmeg. The English liked a little bit of nutmeg with it. I remember one Irish brew, Dr. Pat, was rum flavoured and wine dipped. So I don't know how that went. So all this was done before it was put together and pressed away dried for storage, and then eventually sent to the market. Now, just coming back to our subject here, our cutter, you can see the multiple cuts. Now, if we're assuming this is from late 1700s, we're in the early 2000s, it's 250 years old. So that's quite a lot of chopping in 250 years. And this is quite feasible. When you look underneath, this hole that takes in what I suspect is a blacksmith's square nut has been drilled, because there are round sections of the drill there, probably with a brace and bit type drill, and then he's used a chisel to cut out the corners so the nut won't turn within the hole. And then the blade itself is screwed to the nut. And we can unscrew that and show you that, as I said, that threaded area is part of the whole machine. We will get there. But you can see here where he's actually bronzed a screw onto the end of this piece of the cutter. So he hasn't had to cut that one, he's got a screw and put it on. That was probably done since, I would say. And that's a very hard wood. It could be English yew, but when you look at it, the grain is very wavy, which means it's a very tough, it'll stand wear a lot without fracturing, because the grain's not straight, it's not going to go into splinters. And that's what's happening here, there's no splinters. Thank you.